suddenly halted. A tall man with tall shades and a stick in his hand caught her eye. Her heart softened immediately and she assumed he was blind. She almost felt tears brimming in her eyes seeing such a handsome man blind. Without a second thought, she grabbed his hand. "Sir, don't worry, I'll help you cross the road." Them was taken aback by her sudden grip. She began dragging him. These rich people just don't care about anyone else. Imagine leaving a blind man to fend for himself on a busy road like this. It's just... Them was about to pass out. Did she just call him blind? "Excuse me," he tried to protest, but she was too caught up in her rant to notice. No, don't thank me. It's my duty as a decent human being. Honestly, what's wrong with people these days? No one cares about the blind, the disabled, or anyone who needs a little extra help. They are all heartless. That's the reason I hate the CEOs and other rich people the most," she said with disdain. He clenched his jaw. Finally, they reached the other side of the road. Wayne released his hand, beaming with satisfaction. "There you go. Be careful on your..." He snapped, visibly irritated. "Are you out of your mind?" Wayne blinked, taken aback. "What? I just helped you cross the road. How ungrateful. Did I tell you help me cross the road?" he said angrily. "Excuse me, mister. You could have told me if you wanted to stand there and burn in this hot weather," she said with a frown. "How do you expect me to tell you if you don't stop blabbering? Childish." He snorted. "Hey, whom did you call childish, you uncle?" She rolled up her sleeves, ready to fight when a man approached them, holding car keys, looking concerned. "Then why did you cross the road?" "I was just bringing the car around." Jack was clearly confused as he glanced at Theon's angry expression. Wayne whipped her head towards Jack, narrowing her eyes in disbelief. "You just left him standing there. How could you be so careless? This world doesn't care about the blind, disabled, or any people," she snapped at him. Jack stared at her confusedly and then burst into laughter. "She thinks you're blind, eh?" Jack doubled over, laughing so hard he had to hold his stomach. Wayne's face flushed with confusion and embarrassment as she looked between the two men. "Wait, he's not blind." Tim pinched the bridge of his nose, exasperated. "No, I'm not. And for the record, you practically dragged me across the road." I scratched her head, trying to make a sense of it all. But the dark glasses and the stick. Jack, still chuckling, patted Tim on the back. "You really should stop wearing those shades there. You are giving people the wrong idea. And why did you have to hold Grandma's stick?" Tim shot him a glare and then turned to Wayne. "I haven't seen such a crazy girl in my life, stupid," he muttered. "Hey, you ungrateful rascal. I dragged you all the way here even though you're so heavy." She pointed her index finger at him. Tim's eyes darkened. He held her finger in a tight grip. "Whom did you say heavy? Do you think I'm fat? You dragged me by yourself." She freed her finger from his grip. "I did that out of kindness. You can't be that rude, you uncle." Tim threw a fist in air, taking deep breaths, and turned to Jack. "I can't with this crazy girl. Let's go," he muttered through a clenched jaw and snatched the car keys from him, handing him the stick. One shot daggers at him while Jack waved at her with a smile. "Bye, beautiful girl." One smiled back, staring at his retreating figure. Few days later. After struggling for a few days, Wayne finally got a job, and now she was sitting in front of the elderly woman, fidgeting her fingers on her lap with a lower head like a culprit. "What is your name and age?" Old Mrs. Kim began, her voice calm yet serious. "I'm Wayne, my age is 24. She mumbled, lifting her gaze to look at her. "Why do you want to work as a caretaker? What makes you think you're suited for this job?" "I have always enjoyed helping others, and I think I'm really good at taking care of people. I'm hardworking and I'm willing to learn." Mrs. Kim nodded. "And your previous experience?" "I have worked a few odd jobs here and there, but nothing official like this, but I promise I'll do my best." "Where do you come from?" "I'm appointing you as my caretaker. You will live here. Wouldn't your parents mind?" Her eyes turned gloomy. "I come from an orphanage. I don't have a family. In short, I'm an orphan." Mrs. Kim nodded, pursing her lips. She touched her weak spot and instantly regretted seeing her gloomy eyes. "What are your plans for the future?" "I want to have a home, a she said with a beautiful smile. Mrs. Kim also smiled, staring at her as her expression softened. Just as the words left Wine's mouth, the door to the room burst open and Theo stormed in clearly in a hurry. Grandma, He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes locking onto Wine. You? They both exclaimed in unison, shock written all over their faces. Mrs. Kim raised and broke, looking at between them. Do you know each other? Of course, this madam is so kind that she dragged me over the road thinking I'm blind. He said furiously through gritted teeth. Wine narrowed her eyes. That's your mistake. Why did you have to wear those dark shades and hold a stick? Then crossed his arms, narrowing his eyes at her. Stop your nonsense and tell me what are you doing here? Mrs. Kim smiled, looking between them. She is here because she is the new caretaker. Theo's eyes widened further, disbelief watching over his face. She's what? Wine jumped to her own defense. Yes, I am the new caretaker. What's it to you? Theo scoffed. Of all the people in this world, it had to be you. He ran his fingers through his hair. No way, Grandma, this girl is crazy. I have got someone much better option than her. Wine glared at him and drew close to him. What do you think of yourself, you uncle? I am your grandma's caretaker, not yours. This has nothing to do with you, right, Grandma? She turned to face Grandma, who nodded with a soft smile. Yes, I like this girl, Theo, let her be. Theo gnashed his teeth. I'll see you. He threatened her and walked out. Wine shook her head and faced Grandma, who gestured for her to come close. Wine had grown fond of the house, especially Mrs. Kim, who had become like a grandmother to her. For the past few days, she had also developed a good friendship with Jack, who was easy to talk. What didn't change was her constant bickering with Theo. Today, Theo's uncle's family had arrived, so Wine was sitting in the living room to avoid his aunt's sharp gaze that was shooting daggers at her. Now Theo's knees shot up in front of her with a chocolate bar that melted in her hands. Wine swiftly snatched it from the little one's hand. The little girl's lips quivered and soon she was bawling her eyes out. Theo walked into the room intending to call Wine for something when his eyes landed on the sink. He froze, his mouth hanging open in shock. There was Wine sitting on the couch devouring a chocolate bar while his little niece stood a few feet away crying her heart out. What the? He muttered under his breath, striding over to Wine, fury rising. Did you just snatch chocolate from a child? Wine blinked up at him, completely unfazed by his anger. She wasn't eating it, she said with a stroke, taking another bite. Theo's eyes widened in disbelief. She's crying, Wine. Give it back. Without waiting for her reply, Theo reached down to snatch the chocolate from her, but Wine pulled it back quickly, shielding it with her body. Hey, this is mine now, she protested, glaring at him and leaning back on the sofa. Theo moved close to her, returning her glare. Give it back. The little one ran away. Wine shook her head. No way, I'm almost done. Theo stumbled upon her and placed his hands on either side of her head. Both of them stared at each other with flushed faces and pounding hearts. Theo's breath went uneven, staring at her so closely. Wine gulped as Theo subconsciously leaned his face close to her. In the blink of an eye, he landed hard on the floor. What were you doing? Of course, taking back the chocolate. Don't flatter yourself, he said, shaking his head and stood. Wine rolled her eyes and finished the half chocolate. Next time, don't steal it from kids. Have some shame. She raised her brows. Then buy me a bunch of it and it's not stealing. She wasn't eating it. She pouted, shrugging her shoulders. Theo ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. Unbelievable. You're worse than a kid yourself. Wine stuck her tongue out at him, which only made his irritation grow. Then buy me some, come on. He pressed his smile at this childish girl. Fine, I'll go buy you some chocolate. Just stop traumatizing my niece. He closed his arms over his chest. Wine's eyes lit. Really? You'd do that? Yes, I'll get you some chocolate. Just don't snatch it from kids next time, okay? She grinned and nodded. Go and bring me now, fast. She stood and turned him to the door. He walked out with a smile. Wine sat waiting for him. After 15 to 20 minutes, Theo came back with a bag full of chocolates. Wine's eyes lit and she strode to him. Are these for me? She grabbed the bag from him with a grin. Theo raised his brows. Yes, but don't be too happy. I'll deduct the money from your salary. Wine's smile faded, not noticing the mischief in his eyes. "You're so mean, you blind uncle," she said through gritted teeth and hit him with the bag. He opened his mouth to speak, but Jack's voice interrupted him. "Don't worry, Wine. I have bought you this. Take it as a present from me." Jack lifted the bag in his hand. Wine smiled, handing him the bag with a nod. Then clenched his fist. "Thank you, Jack." The bright smile on her face and her soft gaze on Jack made him feel something he couldn't understand. All he knew was he was feeling a burn in his chest. He stared at their retreating figures as Wine dragged away Jack. At night, Sam was sitting in Grandma's room after his uncle's family was gone. They were talking when the door burst open and Wine barged in, her face flushed with anger, her eyes fiery. "You?" she shouted, pointing an accusatory finger at him. "What now?" Wine stomped over her hands on her hips. "Why did you throw my chocolates?" "What are you talking about?" "I didn't throw away anything," he said nonchalantly. "Don't play dumb. The maid saw you taking them from the kitchen counter. You're just trying to make me miserable." Her voice trembled, thick with frustration. To Thane's shock, her eyes were welling up with tears. He stood and moved close to her. "You're heartless, I hate you," she mumbled and stormed out without hearing him out. Thane stood frozen for a moment, a strange anxiety creeping up in his chest. "Grandma, do you think I hurt her feelings?" he said, his voice laced with confusion. Mrs. Kim, who had been silently observing the entire scene with amusement, let out a deep sigh. She calmly placed her cup of tea on the table, stood up, and without warning, picked up one of her shoes. Before Thane could even react, she threw it right at his head. "What was that for?" he groaned, rubbing the spot where the shoe had hit. "For being an idiot, that's what. You probably did something without even realizing it. That girl cares about the tiniest things, and if you threw away her chocolates, you'd better believe it's serious." Thane blinked, still rubbing his head. "Jack gave it to her. It displeased me, and I don't know why." Mrs. Kim raised a brow. "Wine is affecting you. You feel something for her." Thane groaned, slumping on the chair. "I don't get it. Why does she get so worked up over a box of chocolates?" He said because she likes Jack and he gave it to her. He felt a sudden surge of jealousy which surprised him. Mrs. Kim chuckled softly, walking over to her grandson and patting his shoulder. "It's not about the chocolates, dear. It's about how you make her feel. Now stop sulking and go after her. You don't want her to go to bed upset." He nodded and stood, making his way to Wine's room. His heart beat a little faster than usual, a feeling he couldn't quite put into words. As he approached her door, he hesitated, knocking softly before peeking in. Wine was sitting on her bed, hugging a pillow to her chest, clearly still upset. "Wine, I want to talk to you." She glared at him. "About what?" He scratched the back of his neck, feeling awkward. "I didn't throw your chocolates. They're in my room." He walked closer and set the bag on her bedside table. "These are the ones I bought for you. I was just joking earlier about deducting the money. I'm sorry if I upset you. You didn't accept mine, so I was kinda mad and stole the ones Jack gave you." She stared at him for a moment. "You didn't throw them." He shook his head and sat beside her. "Then return them quickly," she demanded. "You have to eat mine first." She rolled her eyes. "Why were you so mad about the chocolates?" He stared at her intently. Wine hesitated, biting her lip as she hugged her knees to her chest. Her eyes dropped to her hands, fidgeting with the edge of her blanket. "It's not just about the chocolates. It's just this was the first time someone gave me something with real devotion, you know." Then clenched his fist, his heart ached unexpectedly at her words, a strange pang shooting through his chest. He swallowed, trying to compose himself as he leaned in slightly. "What do you mean?" "I have always wanted a family. Someone who would care for me, someone who would just give me something, even if it's small, because they wanted to make me happy. Jack is one of the first people to ever do that. It's silly, but it meant a lot to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam felt a tightness in his throat, an unfamiliar emotion stirring inside him. For some reason, the thought of finding that sense of belonging with Jack made his chest ache in a way he couldn't explain. But he pushed the feeling down, keeping his expression neutral. "I I didn't realize it was that important to you. I'm sorry, he murmured, his eyes softening as he looked at her. Wayne glanced at him, her expression warm. It's okay, I just got too emotional. But I guess Jack wasn't the first person to give you something. It was me. She rolled her eyes. But you teased me, she said with a pout. Ken chuckled softly. So what do you say we call a truce? No more bickering. He held out his hand, a small smile playing on his lips. Can we be friends? Wayne raised him from her lips twitching as she tried not to smile. I don't know. I don't think your girlfriend Roma will like that very much. Ken let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Roma's not my girlfriend. She's my aunt's niece. Wayne rolled her eyes playfully. She acts like one. Grandma doesn't like her either. She keeps saying you shouldn't marry her. Ken's eyes twinkled with mischief as he leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to a teasing whisper. Well, then maybe I won't marry her, but only if you marry me instead. Wayne's eyes widened at his sudden playful proposal, and she stared at him in shock for a moment before bursting into laughter. What? Ken grinned, clearly enjoying her reaction. You heard me. If you don't want me to marry Roma, you'll have to take the spot. He joked. Wayne shook her head, still laughing, her cheeks flushing slightly. That's impossible. Ken smirked and trapped her between his arms, taking her off guard. You have to admit, life wouldn't be boring with me around. He brushed her hair over her shoulder and caressed her neck with his thumb. What are you doing? She mumbled as his thumb glided over her sensitive spot. Ken parted his lips to speak, staring deep into her eyes when the door burst open with a familiar feminine voice. What the hell is going on here? Ken rolled his eyes while Wayne looked over Ken's shoulder. No way, this witch is staying again. She's going to eat a salad. Move away, she said lazily in a low tone and slightly pushed him. Ken inhaled a deep breath and moved away, shoving his hands in his pockets. Ken, what were you just doing? Roma rushed to him and tried to grab his hand, but he pulled away. You have no right to question me, Roma. And how many times do I need to tell you stay away from me, don't touch me? He said sternly. Roma gritted her teeth and glared at Wayne. You wench, you seducing him, right you? Ken cut her off. Mind your language, Roma. I let you stay here doesn't mean you own this place. Just because of my aunt, I'm tolerating you. It's just your wishful thinking to marry me. Wayne shook her head. Go and create drama elsewhere, I want to sleep. Roma stormed out while Wayne's expression was enough to tell Ken that there's no room for argument. A few days later, Ken burst through the hospital doors, his heart pounding with fear and anxiety. Wayne had called him saying Grandma was rushed to the hospital. Without wasting a second, he dropped everything and sped to the hospital. But nothing could have prepared him for the scene that greeted him as he stepped inside. His uncle stood near the reception, his face twisted with fury, while his wife and Roma stood next to him, glaring at a weeping Wayne, who looked utterly devastated. But what made his blood boil were the two police officers standing beside them, clearly called to question Wayne. His uncle's wife was accusing Wayne of something, her voice shrill and venomous. This girl must have done something. Ever since she came into the house, things have been going wrong. She shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Wayne. Roma chimed in, her tone full of disdain. She's always been suspicious. How can we trust her around Grandma? Wayne stood there, tears streaming down her face. Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, but no one would listen. Ken's rage surged through him like a wildfire. He strummed over his voice loud and commanding as he yelled, Stop it, what the hell is going on here? Everyone turned to him, but his attention was solely on Wayne, who looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, her body shaking. Without hesitation, Ken rushed to her and held her shoulders. Are you okay? She barely nodded. Sir, let us interrogate. Ken turned to them sharply. Wayne hid behind him and clenched his shirt in her fist. And who permits you? This is no crime case. Grandma is already sick. Now tell me how much money they have given you for this. He pointed at Roma, his uncle, and his aunt, who avoided his gaze. The officers glanced at each other and stepped back. Sorry to bother you, sir and ma'am, he said and walked away. They are gone. He turned to Wayne and pulled her into his arms. holding her tightly as she sobbed into his chest. If not for Thane's support, she would have collapsed on the floor. Thane, you don't know what she... Thane cut her off. Enough, you're no one to talk in my family matter. How dare you accuse one without proof? He roared, making them flinch. The visitors and nurses stopped looking at them. Uncle, take your wife and this woman away before I lose the last shred of my patience. His uncle and the others hesitated for a moment before reluctantly stepping back. Thane looked down at Wine, who was still sobbing softly against his chest, her body trembling. They won't bother you anymore. He held her tight in his hand, gently stroking her hair, trying to calm her down. Why are you so scared? I thought you were brave and strong. Come on, stop crying. He murmured softly. She sniffled. They could have sent me to prison. I'm still weak. I have no one to save me. I would have disappeared and no one would remember me. She said between hiccups. Thane's heart ached. He clenched his jaw. As long as I'm alive, no one can do anything to you, Wine. You have me. You're not weak or alone. He whispered, his eyes darkening. Sit here. I'll bring you some water. He sat her and walked away. For the first time in her life, Wine felt protected. Truly protected. Thane's arms around her, his words of comfort, his unwavering defense of her, it all made her feel something that she hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. The weight of the world didn't seem so heavy with him by her side. She thought, staring at his retreating figure. After a few minutes, Thane came back and handed her the water. In the meantime, the doctor came out and said Grandma was fine. She just had a minor heart attack. Thane went to complete some formalities and soon came back only to find Wine still sobbing silently. He sat close to her and turned her to face him. Why are you still crying? Were you that scared of them? His hands softly brushed the tears from her cheeks. I'm not crying because of them. I'm scared for Grandma. She wiped her face with trembling hands. His expression softened, his heart twisting at her words. He cupped her face gently, his thumb caressing her cheek as he spoke with quiet reassurance. The doctor said Grandma is stable. She's going to be okay, Wine. You don't have to worry. Wine sniffled again, her eyes still filled with worry, but Thane's words soothed her. I never knew what it felt like to have a family, not until I met Grandma and Jack. I finally understand what it's like to have a brother and a grandmother who cares. Thane's heart swelled at her words, but when she mentioned Jack as brother, something inside him relaxed. He hadn't realized just how much he had been bothered by their growing closeness. Hearing her refer to Jack as a brother felt like a small victory, and a mischievous grin spread across his face. So Jack's being friend-zoned and promoted to brother status. Wine shot him half-hearted glare and pushed his hands. I'm being serious. He laughed softly, leaning a little closer, his voice lowering into a playful tone. I'm serious too, Wine, but you know, if you're enjoying the whole family thing, I can offer you an even bigger one. She blinked, her brow furrowing in confusion. What? Thane smirked, his eyes gleaming with amusement. You could have a massive family if you marry me. My parents are coming back from abroad tonight. I'll introduce you to them as my fiancé. What do you say? Wine's eyes widened, her mouth falling open in shock. What? Are you crazy? She stammered, her cheeks flushing a bright red. Thane laughed at her reaction, leaning closer until his face was only inches from hers. Come on, it's a great deal. You get me, Grandma, Jack, my parents. You'll never be lonely again. Wine gaped at him, her heart racing as his teasing words sank in. She tried to glare at him, but the warmth in his gaze and the closeness between them made it hard to stay mad. You're ridiculous, she muttered. He raised and broke, his smirk never fading. Is that a no? Of course it's a no. That girlfriend of yours would have a fit. She will come after me. Wine shot back. Thane chuckled, shaking his head. Roma's not my girlfriend, Wine. She's just my aunt's niece, nothing more. Besides, Grandma doesn't like her either. She says I should marry someone who can make her laugh. Wine rolled her eyes, trying to ignore the way her heart skipped a beat at the proximity of his face. Well, Grandma's right about that. You should marry someone who makes you happy. Thane's teasing smile softened just a little as he gazed at her, his eyes flickering with an emotion she couldn't quite place. What if that someone is you? Wine froze, her breath catching in her throat as his words lingered in the air between them. Her heart raced wildly, her face flushing as she stared into his dark, intense eyes. Something about the way he said it so softly, so earnestly made her pulse quicken. He leaned back slightly, giving her a bit of space, but the playful grin remained on his lips. "Stop teasing," she mumbled, avoiding his gaze. "But seriously, my parents are coming tonight. I wasn't joking about introducing you." Wayne blinked with surprise. "Grandma talks about you all the time. They're going to want to meet the girl who has stolen their mother's heart and their sons." He mumbled the last part inaudibly. Wayne's eyes widened, her heart racing again. "What? But I can't," Thing interrupted her. "You'll be fine. They're going to love you." She stared at him, feeling flustered and overwhelmed by the way he was looking at her, so calm, so confident, made her feel just a little more at ease. She nodded, running her fingers in her hair. Time skip. All this month, Thing's parents grew fond of Wayne. Thing had proposed to her for marriage, but Wayne hadn't answered him yet, and she has been avoiding him since then. Now Wayne walked into the kitchen, her heart pounding as she heard the faint sounds of Thing's arrival. Her feelings were all over the place, and every time she saw him, her heart would race so fast that it made her feel like she was going crazy. She washed her hands, staring at the water as if it would drown her chaotic thoughts. Turning around, she let out a gasp, her hand flying to her chest. Thing was standing there, mere inches from her, his dark eyes gazing down at her with that familiar intensity. She hadn't even heard him come in. "You scared the shit out of me. Why are you avoiding me, Wayne?" he asked softly, his voice low but steady. Filling the kitchen with warmth, Wayne swallowed, heart stepping back slightly as she forced a smile. "I'm not avoiding you, I'm just busy." He narrowed his eyes slightly, knowing all too well that she was lying. "Busy? You have been avoiding me since I proposed." He took a small step closer, closing the space between them again. Wayne's throat tightened as she looked away, trying to calm the racing of her heart. "I haven't." "Wayne, stop lying to me. Why don't you give me an answer?" His voice was firm but gentle. She bit her lips, staring at the floor as the weight of his question pressed on her. Then didn't move. He stayed close, his presence comforting. Finally, Wayne let out a shaky breath, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if this is right thing." He spoke her slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you're from this big, important family. You have everything going for you. I'm just an orphan. What if this doesn't work? What if I'm not good enough for you? What if you regret this?" For a moment there was silence. She didn't dare to look up, her eyes focused on the floor, bracing herself for whatever Thing would say, but then she felt his hand gently cup her chin, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. His eyes softened as he looked at her, a tenderness in his expression that made her chest ache. "Wayne, why do you think this?" he whispered, his thumb brushing slightly against her cheek, her tears threatened to spill. "Because we are from completely different worlds. What if it's a mistake?" He sighed softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "It's not a mistake, Wayne. The only mistake would be letting you slip away because of some silly notion that you're not enough." She stared at him, her heart thudding in her chest as he continued. "You're more than enough, Wayne. I don't care about status or where you come from. I care about you. I love you. I want us to be together. And I'm not going to give up on us just because things aren't perfect. Relationships take work, and I am willing to put in that work as long as you are." She blinked. "But what if it doesn't work? What if I can't live up to?" He shook his head, cutting her off gently. "Wayne, I am not asking you to be perfect. I'm not asking for anything other than for you to be by my side. That's all I need. And as long as we have each other, we can figure everything else out. But I can't do that if you're running away." His words hit her like a wave washing over her insecurities. His hand slid down from her chin, gently grasping her hand and giving it a reassuring squeeze. "All I'm asking for you is your support, Wayne. We can make this work, I promise you that." "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice trembling. He smiled softly, leaning in just a little closer, his breath warm against her skin. "You don't have to say anything, just trust me." She swallowed, her heart racing as she looked into his eyes. Slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. "Okay, I trust you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Thame's smile grew, his eyes lighting up with a warmth that made one's heart flutter. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss against her knuckles. "That's all I needed to hear," she smiled. Thane leaned in, his lips brushing against her forehead. "I'll take care of everything, Wine. You don't have to worry anymore." She nodded, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered and kissed his chin. Thane tilted his head, holding her by the waist, and captured her lips in a tender kiss. He pressed her against the counter. "Someone might come," she whispered between the kiss, but Thane didn't stop. "Thane!" He instantly pulled away, staring at her with a smile. "What?" "This is the first time you said my name. It never felt so good before." She just smiled and buried her face in his chest. Few years later. It's been a few years since Thane and Wine got married and are blessed with a son who is now 3 years old. The Wine stepped out of the washroom, wiping her hands on a towel, when her eyes landed on a sight that made her gasp. Her heart skipped a bit as she saw little Alison, crouched beside a water bucket, scrubbing her phone with determined little hands. "Alison, what are you doing?" she exclaimed, rushing over in a panic. Her heart nearly stopped as she saw her precious phone submerged in the water. Alison beamed up at her, his eyes wide with innocence and pride. "Mama, the phone was dirty. I gave it a bath," he said as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. Wine stood frozen for a moment, blinking at her now-soaked phone. She gingerly picked it out of the bucket, the screen flickering hopelessly, water dripping from its edges. "Alison, you can't give the phones a bath," she scolded lightly. Alison's face fell and his bottom lip quivered. He clung onto her. "But Mama, it was dirty. It needed a bath." Wine held him close and brushed away the hair from his forehead. "I know, baby, but phones don't need baths, okay? You can't put them in water like that." Just then the door opened and Thane walked in, nursing the commotion. He took one look at the drenched phone in Wine's hand and the guilt expression on Alison's face, and a soft chuckle escaped his lips. "What happened here?" he asked, already guessing the answer. Wine gave him a helpless look. "Your son decided to clean my phone by giving it a bath." Thane's laughter bubbled up again, and he scooped Alison into his arms, kissing his forehead. "Alison, phones don't need baths, okay? Only people do," he said gently. Alison screamed in his arms, pouting, but it was dirty. Thane smiled and patted his back. "I know you were trying to help Birdie, but next time let Mama take care of her phone, okay?" Alison nodded, his pout still firmly in place. Thane then gently set him down and said, "Now go apologize to Mama." Alison shuffled back over to Wine, throwing his arms around her neck and resting his head on her shoulder. "Sorry, Mama, I'll buy you a new phone when I grow up." She chuckled and kissed his cheeks. "It's okay." Thane ruffled Alison's hair, then sent him off with a playful nudge. "Go see Uncle Jack. He's waiting for you." As he walked out, Wine stood and turned around to keep away her phone when Thane wrapped his arms around her waist from behind and pulled her into him. Like mother, like son, his mother thought a perfectly fine person was blind and needs help, while the son thought the phone was dirty and needs the bath. He whispered into her ear, his lips brushing against her earlobe. Wine chuckled, holding his hands and hummed, "I'll buy you a new phone, don't worry." She rested her head against his chest while Thane buried his face in her neck. "Thank you, Thane," she mumbled. "It's just a phone." "Not for the phone, but everything, Thane." He pulled out and turned her around. "You deserve all of it and more. Don't thank me, Wine. You have made my life just as beautiful. Don't dare forget that." He gently pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for making my life so beautiful, for loving me, for everything. You don't need to thank me. I should be thanking you for loving me, for being my wife, the mother of our son. You complete me, Wine. You and Alison are my whole world." Wine smiled and leaned in his embrace.